All right, so what we're going to be doing right now is doing an engine performance test on oil pressure testing. This gives us another engine performance evaluation test to look at the internal condition of the engine. We're not looking at the cylinder sealing now, rings, valves, head gaskets, etc. But what we are looking at is bearing clearance, rod bearings, main bearings, cam bearings if it has cam bearings, because only pushrod engines typically had cam bearings, overhead cam engines typically didn't. And so what we're going to be looking at is oil pressure. And so if the bearings are worn, you're going to bleed off oil pressure and it'll be lower. We expect oil pressure, like it says in the Google Classroom engine performance testing notes. It'll say that 20 to 40 psi, depending on the temperature of the engine at idle, is fairly normal, usually on the lower end. And then 40 to 60 psi is pretty normal at RPM over 2000, etc. So what we'll do is first I'll idle the engine and you'll see the oil pressure right here on the gauge. I'll move the camera closer so you can actually read it. So right now you can take a look at it and see that it reads 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100. And so what we're going to do is start the engine, idle it, let's see what it's at. Here we go. Hey, Katie, I paused it. I was recording.
Oh, I'm so
No, it's
sorry.
okay, I paused.
This has been down there,
Okay.
and we're just trying to get rid of stuff.
Yeah, sure, great, thanks.
Thank you. Is that Rich? Is that yours?
It's a skills usage, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, it's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I should have had. So what we want to think about further is that if you have a gauge on the dash that's reading low oil pressure, we have a way of diagnosing that to see if it's actually the gauge on the dash or if it's the sending unit or if the engine actually has low oil pressure. Sending units, the little unit screwed into the oil gallery that sends a signal up to the gauge on the dash, are very problematic. They fail regularly. It's not uncommon at all. So what we do is we'll unscrew it, and they have pipe threads. They usually seal on the threads, which means we have to have some sort of thread sealant or Teflon tape. The threads are tapered. We unscrew those, and then we screw in a good known gauge. That means a gauge that we know that's accurate. And I have one of those so we can check it here in the shop. And then we're going to read the pressure so we can verify if what the engine actually has is accurate to what the gauge is showing. Most gauges just show H for high and L for low. And yeah, we go, okay, there's a middle mark. Maybe we want it near the middle mark. Well, what is the middle mark? Is it 40 psi? Is it 20 psi? So by putting in a good known pressure gauge and sort of figuring it out, calibrating it, then we can plug in the sending unit and we know when it's on that middle mark, it's 35 psi or whatever it would be. We have an 05 Tundra out there in the shop, and the oil gauge read about 1/4 above low, and it looked low to me. So I took the sending unit out, plugged in a good known gauge, and sure enough, the oil pressure was just fine. It was idling at 35 psi. It was not a problem at all. Either the sending unit is not entirely accurate or the gauge on the dash is not entirely accurate. Maybe that's common for that truck. I don't know, but it was something that we checked out. So in any case, we would say that based on this 35 psi idling oil pressure and 55 psi RPM oil pressure, that the bearings in this thing are in just fine shape. There's nothing wrong with them. And everything should be fine here. Okay, that's it for now.